Thank you. Well, one more sound test. Can you hear me in the back? If not, okay, great. So again, my name is Claire Nelson, and I make enemies for a living. I am not connected with any industry analyst organization. I'm not connected with any multi-factor authentication vendors. I'm an independent voice. That's why I make the enemies. And hopefully today you will learn from my mistakes and my trials and tribulations. I recently assessed and continue to assess over 200 multi-factor authentication vendors and have been unsuccessful in finding a solution for my client who says they want two things. They want banking-grade security and they want a seamless UX. Because unlike what you heard in the keynote, their problem is not about internal employees. Their problem is the external employee, or I mean the external customers, the external partners, the people that demand a user experience that's seamless, frictionless, that rocks. So this is the scope for today, thank you. And for internal employees, you can make an internal employee stand on his or her head and sing Let It Be to authenticate. It's not the same thing with external users. We'll talk about the protocols another day. And this is primarily US-centric. Why? It changes when you cross an ocean. For instance, in France, if you want to use biometrics for authentication, you need CNIL, one of their country organizations, to give you blessing to use biometrics. And in India, some of the trends are different, so it really does change depending on your geography. So who knows the definition for multi-factor authentication? The NIST definition, which by the way is being revised, they recently made some requests for people to give input on revising the definition, two or more of something you know, have, or are. And no fair using multiples from the same group. You can't use two of something you know or two biometrics. You need two or more from separate categories of something you know, something you have, something you are. And so I asked NIST, well, what's the origin of this definition? From whence did it come? Because I really want to understand, because I really disagree with a lot of what's in there. And they informed me they did not know. Go ask Gene Spafford. I asked the real Spaff, and he said, I don't know. So how can you write a definition if you don't know the origin? And if you're working on multi-factor authentication, you don't have a coherent definition. How do you proceed? There's a growing chasm between the NIST definitions and some of these new, more creative definitions. And so what you see is people are trying to use location or time or device ID. And can you turn off that microphone, please? They're trying to use different factors, if you will. And according to NIST, you cannot use time, location, or device ID as a factor for multi-factor authentication. And these are great words. Oh, I think it's my laptop. These are great words from FFIEC. Those of you in the financial services world know that there is no one authentication method that's bomb-proof, foolproof, hack-proof. I've come up with one exception. I'll talk about it later. Digital authentication technologies, they're more of a DoD play, it's expensive, and they have a new way of doing context-based location fingerprints, that's later on. But everything else I've run across can be easily hacked, not via a nation state, but via someone with a very small budget. It really does have a mind of its own. So why are there so many vendors? It's a very difficult problem to solve. Take everything from encryption to human psychology and go solve for all the variables in between. So you're solving for an equation that's essentially 20 variables simultaneously, very tough problem, and the iPhone of authentication has yet to be invented. iPhone's not such a big deal right now, but it was a transformational shift when it came out. And today, what are people doing for authentication? It's just one step above hardware tokens for authentication. We have soft tokens and we use a mobile device. Authentication is still in caveman stages. Oh, it just went to one slide. Okay, so there are many suboptimal choices that multi-factor authentication vendors are using. And I want to alert you for a couple of reasons. Number one, as a customer, some of these may be foisted upon you. And then number two, if it's your responsibility to set policy, or number three, you're creating a product that does multi-factor authentication, these are just some of the things to keep in mind. And some of the things I'll cover are in the biometrics field, 2D fingerprints, SMS OTP, QR codes, and there are a lot of behavioral biometric authentication vendors, and they have a strange requirement. You have to insert JavaScript into the browser. Now, what does that sound like? That sounds like malware to me. And how many of you turn off JavaScript in your browser? How many of you use White Hat Security's Aviator browser? There are all these paths where this simply won't work. But if this technology proceeds maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, it may be something to use. Oh, this slip without me looking. There's over-reliance on GPS. There was a company in town, anyone here from Twofer? I used to call them Onefer, because they really didn't use multiple factors. Well, turns out they have the last laugh. They were acquired by Salesforce. But it just, you can't over-rely on GPS or location. I'll tell you more about that later. And of course, we'll talk about weak recovery methods. And your mobile devices are secure, right? Trusted device for authentication. And lastly, encryption. Make sure you know the source of the crypto libraries, what's a random number generator in their mind, who's really doing it. And you can't just look on someone's website to assess a vendor and what they're doing. What do you have to do? Roll up your sleeves, go and meet with the people who are really doing the work, and ask them deep, gnarly questions and get answers. So there is some kind of irrational exuberance going on with biometric adoption. And according to Juniper Research, 770 million apps that use biometrics will be downloaded annually by the year 2019. 770 million. That's up from 6 million in 2015. And most of it's fingerprint. Now, I looked at these statistics going from 6 million in 2015 to 770 million. I thought, that must be wrong. Is it a typo? Well, then I found out they are accounting for a very unique population. You know, that did automatic. I didn't touch that. It's the feline population. There's and by the way, I have footnotes on almost every slide, and you can reference. There's a little video here. It's quite comical. I'm not sure if it's real, but it is quite comical. So who knows who this is? What's being done to her? I was at B-Sides Austin, and I asked the question, what's being done to her? And some smart aleck in the back said, she's getting a proctology exam. But no, this is German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen, and her fingerprints being hacked. There's a gentleman by the name of Jan Chrysler. I've invited him to Austin several times, AKA Starbug. He's with the Chaos Computer Club in Hamburg, Germany. And he has been cloning people's fingerprints for years. He is a grandmaster at this. And again, back to, does he have the backing of a nation state? Does he have a huge expensive lab? No, on a shoestring budget, he is doing this. He wins all of the, is Touch ID hacked yet? It only takes him 24 hours. He hacks every generation that comes out. And since 2006, he has been publishing his findings. Here is, I wonder why it's auto-advancing. If anyone has any insight into why my slides are auto-advancing, come talk to me. But anyway, here there's a video. This is the reference to it. I urge you to watch this. It's only a few minutes, but Starbug goes through the entire process of faking Touch ID. So in the title of my talk, I used a big word, irresponsible. And it's not meant to be a slam, and by the way, the whole goal of this talk is to elevate the discussion of multi-factor authentication so we're all a little more educated. But if you go to Black Hat or DEF CON and you listen to Wei and Zhang, this is from their slide deck, and it shows how from the time you touch the sensor before it gets to a safe place, your fingerprint can be stolen or lifted, right? That's no big deal. If you go to DEF CON or Black Hat, you're educated about that. But look at the red writing. This can be done in large scale. Where is this from? Forbes magazine. It's common knowledge now. So there's no longer an excuse from some of the authentication vendors. Oh, we didn't know about it. It's not that, it's esoteric. It can only be done one at a time. It's just a targeted threat at one person. This can be done at scale. Oh, it auto-advanced for me again. It's almost in time with me. I wonder if this is set on time. Oh, well, so anyway, this is a test, a show of hands. In one corner, we have Jan Chrysler, AKA Starbug. And in the other corner, we have Dan Riccio, a senior VP from Apple. Now, when I went through this at AppSec USA, there were some gentlemen from Apple, and they left the room. So if anyone's from Apple today, I apologize ahead of time. But Dan Riccio from Apple, he says, fingerprints are one of the best passwords in the world. On the other hand, we have Starbug, who says, don't use fingerprint recognition systems for security-relevant applications. So who votes for Dan Riccio? Silence. Who votes for Starbug? Oh, all of you are awake and well caffeinated. Bravo. I think this is advancing. And I apologize. I couldn't make this do this if I wanted to. So in the world of behavioral biometrics, this is a case where they're measuring how you type, how you swipe, the pressure, the rhythm. And there's one company that does this. And again, I talked earlier, it has a JavaScript requirement. There's some other issues about privacy. If your hand is injured, if you break your hand and start to use another hand, this won't work. And then here's a quote from one of the founders. If you are highly intoxicated, this may not work. Now, how about on the bright side? Let's talk about something positive of some research people are doing in the world of multi-factor authentication. And this is, again, in the domain of behavioral biometrics. So I talked about the user experience. It really should be invisible. I should be able to authenticate and have a great user experience instead of go downstairs, get my phone, SMS. So this company has a concept called an invisible challenge. And it's a little creepy. It's BioCatch from Israel, bear with me. But what they do is they collect over 500 parameters of your behavior, so they know it's you. And one of the things they track is, when your cursor goes away, what do? You jiggle your mouse? Well, they contend that that jiggle and a few other factors are unique to you. So if you're online, you're going to buy a $6,000 tractor from Home Depot, they want to authenticate you, they'll make your mouse will disappear. They'll see how you jiggle. Oh, it's you. Go ahead. It's fine. So this whole concept, though, of invisible challenges is something they're working on. And they could chain together multiple challenges, not just the mouse jiggle, but you get my point. So in the world of biometrics, nothing's being left out. Your gait, your odor, your ears, your lip prints, almost anything. There are tattoos. There's a picture of one. Nothing is being left out, even pills and tattoos. If you think about it, what's to keep someone from collecting all of this information and storing it? Your identity, your physical, everything tied to your physical identity can be stored somewhere else and used in ways for which you do not have control. And here, who's ready for thought auth? In 2013, at the International Conference on Financial Cryptography and Data Security, I believe it was in Tokyo, they demonstrated using brainwaves for authentication. So it's really not science fiction. It's around the corner. And who knows what this is? What kind? 3D fingerprint, right? And in red here, no matter how advanced the biometric is, it's the same threat model. It's the same basic threat model. So if someone came to me and go, Claire, someone can authenticate via heartbeat. Isn't that more secure than fingerprint? No matter what biometric is being used, it's the same basic threat model. You have a sensor, you collect, you match. There's some ways to make it a little more hard to crack. This is really, I wonder why my slides keep advancing. No matter what the biometric is being used, it's the same basic threat model. So who knows the answer to this? How do you stump a multi-factor authentication vendor? Ask for a threat model. This is really annoying. My slides keep advancing. I'm going to go to something else. Bear with me. We're going to go to you can all see that? Because yeah, okay. So ask for a threat model. You may not get a threat model. You may get excuses. I've asked a number of vendors for the threat model. How many have replied with a threat model? 0. 0. So there's a person, his name is John Stephen, formerly of Cigital. He's now the CTO of a company called Codiscope. It's a spin-off from Cigital. But Google John Stephen. If you learn one thing, that takeaway in terms of a threat model and how to do a threat model, he's the master at it. There's some other schools of thought and other models and frameworks for threat modeling, but he's one of the best. And he was here in Austin. A number of you may have taken his workshop on threat modeling. So some posit that fingerprints might be usable as usernames, but they may not be used to authenticate an identity. Why? They're not a secret. That you can't, and plus they're not revocable. And every time I say they're not revocable, someone raises, well, you could acid and say it's painful if you might be, or difficult or complex. But for the most part, you can't change your fingerprints. It's not, you can reset a password easily, but to reset your fingerprints or any of your other biological markers, that is a very difficult problem. And this is from Dustin Kirkland, who's here in Austin. He might be here today. So Dr. Thomas Keenan spoke at Black Hat in August. And he's also known as Dr. Future. He says that we don't discuss the consequences of the errors and error rates associated with biometrics. Who here took their CISSP exam? So you know what FAR, FIR, and are. FAR, false acceptance rate. FIR, false reject rate. And you just took, Tiana, you're fresh off the boat there from CISSP land. Well, you learn that these rates are non-zero. False acceptance rate, oops, we let a bad guy in. False reject rate, oops, that platinum customer, we rejected them. And no one's really looking at these. And it reminds me, there's a Harvard psychologist, and she says, a lot of people are frequently in error, but rarely in doubt. That's how I describe biometrics. And the thing with Dr. Future is that he says that the biometrics can be grabbed without our consent. We don't always know when our biometrics are being lifted from our person. So I'm predicting the biometric backlash. It's a question not if, but when. And I'll draw your attention to number 3 here. When identity theft is linked to stolen biometrics, I think you'll see a lot more activity around this whole, people are really, it's a trend, it's a fad, use biometrics, especially for external customers. And the OPM breach, first they said it's only 1 million fingerprints that were stolen. Now it's over 56 million fingerprints. In a few months, we might learn that it's more. So let's talk about SMS OTP. That's safe, right? Dmitrienko and some of his Intel buddies, they went to 4 of the largest banks in the United States and cracked SMS OTP almost instantly. It was a no-brainer for them. Academic papers from Northeastern and other collaborators, SMS OTP is not secure. Now, why don't we see this in public from an industry analyst or in dark reading or wherever you go? How come it takes someone from academia to say SMS OTP is not secure? Why is that? I'm stumped. I don't know why, but it's part of the reason is there are a lot of companies, I won't name some of the larger ones, that are invested in SMS OTP and they're still using it today. And so if you have a chance, you can speak back. If someone gives you an authentication method to use, you as a customer can speak back and give your opinion. I hate to say that I'm a customer of Charles Schwab. but I am still. And they didn't have any authentication method beyond username and password, so I asked them what's available, and they snail mailed me a hardware token. So, and that's all they have available. So part of this too is we as consumers can be more informed and more selective and give feedback when something is foisted upon us. And then here's the threat model for SMS OTP. The last one, note here after physical SIM and wireless interceptions, are mobile phone Trojans. There aren't many of those, are there? Well, those of you, one of my favorites is Operation Emmental. Those of you who crossed the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and get to Europe, this was something that had people all up in arms. Trend Micro wrote extensively about it and unearthed a lot of the findings back in 2014. And basically, the attackers were just scraping the SMS OTPs off Android phones. And here's the diagram. So the Trojan was the vehicle for the malware that stole the OTP. It was child's play once you see what they did. And you can buy the software to go and do this. So who refuses to use QR codes? The thing is, you don't know where you're going. It's like driving blind. And even when they say, here's the URL, who reads the URL? So you could get a link to a malicious site. And if you're talking about something that has a high level of risk, and then there's the QR code, that might be the weak link in all of this. And by the way, these slides are up on SlideShare. Question?
I see a check mark that says use timings up there.
Oh, thank you. I've never, let's go back to slideshow from current slide. Is that better? Thank you very much. That man gets a prize. Who has a drink ticket? Come see me later. We'll make sure you get 2 drink tickets. Very good. So geolocation. Are latitude and longitude sufficient? There's a company called Spriv. Thank you. Do you want to, you can take over with just, oh, you can put that back together too. See that? Yeah. Thank you, Joseph. So there's a company called Spriv out of New York City. It might be a guy living with his mother. The company is still being formulated. But he says, how do you know the difference between a person on the 2nd floor of a building and the 31st floor? He says you really need latitude, longitude, and altitude. All of those. And he has a few patents he's strung together. He's trying to get his company up and running. It's SPRIV. And he's really trying to tell people that latitude and longitude are insufficient. And then here's another company. This is out of all the 200 vendors that I've been assessing, this is the only one that hasn't been hacked, to my knowledge. And it's Digital Authentication Technologies, and they have what's called a contextual location fingerprint. And they're really looking at low frequency emissions. They're looking at your context. It does require a little piece of hardware, oh, by the way, and their DoD, and there's a lot they will tell me about their technology. But they have a method for looking at your context and realizing if you move away from a specific context. So that's Digital Authentication Technologies. Who's familiar with Dr. Todd Humphreys here at UT Austin? He's been spoofing, have you seen some of his work? He's been spoofing GPS for years. He and his students every year, and then again, this is not nation state, this is low budget. He and his students will spoof GPS one way or another for years. It's not really a technology to rely on, especially for higher risk. Oh, okay, let's see if this will work. Okay, we're almost over and we've got it going. Thank you. So this is from the Google product manager, Eric Sachs. What's the Achilles heel of authentication? Account recovery. And there are, I'll talk about the FIDO Alliance later on. Out of all the money they're collecting, how much money are they spending on account recovery? Right, zilch. So there's still a lot of issues around authentication. And until we get the account recovery, that's still an open door for the bad guys. We're locking the front door, but we're leaving the back door open. How many of you use Google Authenticator? I had to try it out, of course. And so in my wallet, I printed out on hard copy the 10 recovery keys. I've used one, and someone told me that after you use up all 10, you can go back and get another batch. But I'm afraid to do that because I'm afraid to lose my accounts. So if anyone's gone through that, let me know. But here it is, 2015, and I have a little piece of paper, and I can have another, but if you lose these, what happens? You're SOL. So again, if anyone wants to work on something that will give you low reward but high pleasure, go work on account recovery. Who's familiar with the OWASP mobile top 10? Right. A company called Meta Intelli did some research. They found out that of 38,000 mobile apps, over 67% had M3. What's M3? Insufficient transport layer. Gee, we heard that from the regular OWASP. Some of these things there's a recurring theme, deja vu all over again. And so the big point is the mobile device as the authentication device, you're really on a slippery slope. And some authentication vendors assume that the mobile device has been pwned, has been hacked, and they take measures. And others, they're just, you're driving blind. So here's my favorite. It's a double standard, and it's almost tongue-in-cheek. And this is an example of a company. It might be USAA, but I don't want to name names. And for internal employees, what do they do for multi-factor authentication? Symantec VIP. And what do they give to the customers? Face and voice. Now, granted, they are two different use cases, and they probably started one, and the security guys probably selected Symantec, and the product managers probably selected face and voice. But why is there this growing chasm between what's used internally and what's used for external customers? And we are the external customers that are saying, OK, I'll use face and voice for my own accounts. So we have a perfect storm. I speak about all these vendors. They're chasing almost $2 billion in revenue. And Apple, Visa, Samsung, they're spending millions of dollars on advertisement. It's cool to use your fingerprint. It's safe to use your fingerprint. And the year of the breach was last year. It could be this year again, too. There's legislation. And then again, the FIDO Alliance, which I'll talk a little bit about next. They're a proponent of biometrics. They're doing a lot of great work. I'm glad that they're making authentication more visible, but at the end of the day, they're promoting biometrics. And they also have some strange ideas about where the secrets are stored. Would you rather store secrets on a hardened server or on someone's Android device where they don't care about it? I have a friend, she goes, I downloaded all these free apps. I'm almost out of room on my phone. She thinks to her, it's cool to download all these free games and apps. Me, I want to get rid of them. I don't trust what's on there. So they want to store secrets on your mobile device. And it's in part of their architectural diagrams, et cetera, and their thinking. I won't say any more about the FIDO Alliance because I want to respect what they're doing, but there are some issues with their work. And this is where it comes from. It's the legacy thinking. And who's this author? It's David Birch. He's the author of Identity is the New Money. If there's one book you want to read this year about identity, I recommend David Birch. Or Google his name. He's got great videos. And he's the kind of person that asks profound questions. And you go, oh, yeah. For instance, he'll ask, why is our name on a credit card? Whom does that serve? The bad guy. I know it's my credit card. I know that number. But if I lose it, it helps the bad guy. So again, if you want to read one book about identity, I recommend David Birch. Let's talk a little bit about IoT. And how are we doing on time?
You've got another 8 minutes.
OK. All right. So Cisco thinks there'll be 50 billion IoT things around. I don't care how many. There are a lot of them. And if you're going to authenticate them, you're in deep kimchi, you're in deep yogurt, you're in deep anything. It's a nightmare. And I'll draw attention to what's coming down the pike. This is not on OWASP.org yet. This is a preview. This is the OWASP IoT Top 10. There's a person named Sebastian Gloria, and he has started the work on the IoT Top 10. So don't take this as gospel yet, but it's a preview of what's to come. And you'll notice that authentication and authorization are high on his list. So here are two predictions of issues we will see with IoT and authentication. And the first one is creative cryptography. And that is almost an oxymoron. Because the last thing I want to do, if I'm hiring some crypto guys, do I want them to be creative? No, I want them to be smart, good, and alert, and have good crypto hygiene. And so what some of the guys at Intel are doing with EPID, Enhanced Privacy ID, instead of the one-to-one mapping that we're all used to seeing, the mapping of a public and a private key, well, they have one-to-many mapping of a public to private keys. And what does this do to the threat surface? It makes it bigger. So some would say, well, you're splitting hairs, but I like to split hairs. And this is one example. You'll see more variations on the theme of where people are taking creative measures with crypto because they are in constrained environments. Another thing you'll see them doing is taking protocols, and instead of having HTTPS, you might have a protocol called co-op. So if you're on the Autobahn, how fast can you go? 70, 80 miles per hour, nice smooth road. If you're on a dirt road, you have to slow down, there are potholes. And so when you're going to go from HTTPS to co-op, you're going to run into all kinds of problems, and people are already predicting the programmers creating it have to know what they're doing, because you're going to be on a bumpy, uneven road, and you're going to run into problems. So be very wary of some of the things you see coming down the pike with IoT and taking the protocols that exist today and putting them in a very small, constrained world. So what's a better solution? A better solution is to design from day one, from the ground up. Take the co-op protocol or take these constrained environments and design the authentication specifically for that environment. Don't take something else that was designed with fewer constraints. Some people are saying consider risk-based authentication. Look at the different factors. And if you take just one of these, like the source IP reputation, how good is that? It may not be that good, but if you have enough factors strung together, maybe that'll work. And so I call this, you ever seen the movie and someone's in New York City and they have 10 locks on their door? Well, does 10 locks equal one good lock? Can a bad guy still come in and then the bad guy comes and they just kick the door open? So many mediocre locks does not equal one good lock, but maybe it makes the person inside feel better. So at the end of the day, what can you do? What will help you in your job or you as a person, a consumer? And number one, request threat models from the vendors. And number two, beware of some of the choices they are making and ask them why. I don't think enough people are pushing back on the vendors. So I am as guilty as you are because we, as decision makers, pay for their solutions. You can be a little more critical. And these are some of the things that I went through today. 2D fingerprints, already hacked biometrics, QR codes, SMS OTP, JavaScript requirements, over-reliance on geolocation, weak account recovery, lack of mobile device risk analysis, and encryption backdoors. There are all these things that you need to inspect, have a conversation, and really dig into the technology behind authentication methods. And I equate a lot of what's going on in the industry with authentication as a fashion trend. What's a fashion trend? Is a skirt length maxi, midi, mini? Well, and what do we do? And I'm a victim of this. I like fashion, I like clothes, but I go and I buy what's in, but that's not the kind of mindset you want with authentication. And so if you look at what's going on with the FIDO Alliance and this biometric trend or fad, that's exactly what's going on. And we're being swayed by the same kind of advertising that the fashion industry uses. rethink the definition of multi-factor authentication. And also, is authentication just a one-time event? Some posit it's a journey, it's ongoing. You don't just do it at login. Ideally, you would do it all the time. Why? A bad guy can get in, they log in, and then what? Lateral moves. You need to know, you need to have continuous authentication if you have a high-risk environment and if you really want to make sure it's not a bad guy. And then depending on your risk scenario, you can combine different methods, or you can create multiple chains or steps. I have one client and they have 3 buckets for authentication. In the first bucket, they have regular old multi-factor authentication. Something you know, something you have, something you are, they pick 2. In the second bucket, they are adding extra parameters, geolocation, time, device ID. And in the third bucket, they have context-based analytics, and they want to get predictive in the future. So they combined all of that, irregardless of performance, because risk is high. They add all that together, and they think they have a suitable multi-factor authentication solution. So with that, any questions? Yes, right. So the question is, I talked about SMS OTP. The question is about TOTP, or time-based OTP. It's the same scenario. If you look at the work of Wei and Zhang, Z-H-A-N-G, they've looked at OTPs as well as the fingerprint. And if you look at the Trend Micro report that talked about Operation Emmental, and then the third resource was Intel's Dmitrienko for SMS OTP and the 4 largest banks. It's not a matter, the timing wasn't the issue. Okay, so the question is, and that's with a hardware token then. So, and the use case that I was looking at is no hardware tokens, and looking at the case where you have not internal employees, but external customers that require 2 basic things. They require banking grade security and a seamless user experience. Because if I'm Netflix and I've got millions and millions of customers, I'm not going to send them hardware tokens. I need something that has a fairly seamless, frictionless user experience. But that's thank you. Thanks, Mike. I have help from the audience answering my own questions.
RSA tokens have been hacked, though.
Yes, they have, right. Any other questions?
So in real life, how you authenticate people is like you know them, right? And you don't trust them immediately. When you meet somebody, you don't trust them. You don't trust people immediately. You get to know them, and then you trust them. Have you ever thought about any kind of authentication system that kind of gradually granted permissions or used the more human model? Or it's
Right.
a pretty bizarre question, so you don't have to answer.
Well, no, that's right on, because in the future, the model will be not authentication. The future will be recognition. It used to be you go to the corner store and you're recognized. The person behind the cash register didn't ask, where's your driver's license, last 4 of your social, they just recognized you. And I have something called dog nose. And in the future, dog nose, Authenticator, will just know you. They'll sniff you out, et cetera. And it can happen gradually because it has to get to know who you are. But in the future, that's what I dream of when I think about where are the solutions today and where should they be tomorrow for this seamless, frictionless user experience. And when I have it, I'll let you know. We'll go patent it, start our own company.
Okay.
All right. Other questions? Dog nose is taken, by the way. That's my.
What was the name of the company you mentioned in New York that started working on context localization?
Okay, so I mentioned 2 companies that are working on location with authentication. And the first company is SPRIV out of New York, and they're working on adding altitude along with latitude and longitude. And then the other company is Digital Authentication Technologies.
The first one, that's the one they presented that New York is rough, right? This year, I believe.
Oh, I'm not sure.
No, I think.
Are you familiar with SPRIV? Yes.
I think I saw it presented.
Right, a startup.
Is that the one you mentioned? You don't know of any hacks?
Okay. So the question is, for which company have I not unearthed or uncovered any hacks. And that was digital authentication technologies, not SPRIV. And digital authentication technologies is closely linked with DoD. It's an expensive implementation, but they're really looking at context and creating something that is very hard to hack. Not unhackable, but not yet hacked. And I should call up Starbug or some of my friends, and I'm sure they'll have at it. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Well, with that, thank you very much.